program director of the Wallace, it was a Wallace Reader's Digest Fund then, in 1992, when the fund awarded the Netters Center first grant to adapt the university-assisted community schools model nationally. This grant and Jane's continued support and friendship have been invaluable for the work of the Netters Center. I also had the pleasure of serving with Jane on the steering committee for the Coalition for Community Schools for 12 years. And Jane has continued with that process for 5 more years and has continued since day one. As the coalition's chair at the time, I witnessed firsthand how Jane's wisdom, enthusiasm, and commitment made an indispensable contribution to the growth of the community school movement. Jane's leadership of the Children's Aid Society's National Center for Community Schools has been exemplary in advancing local practice across the country and indeed around the world. And her expertise has informed the growth and development of the Children's Aid Society network of community schools in New York City, as well as community schools across New York State. Jane is someone I learned from in 1992. I still learn from in 2017. I am pleased to welcome my good friend and long-term colleague to moderate our next session, Jane Quinn.
Thank you. As always, Ira is generous, and I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And wow, thank you all for coming to this session. You are the hardcore. I can see that. I know it's been a long and very enriching day, and when you're the cleanup batters, you always worry that there'll be no audience left. So we're really, really grateful for you, to you for coming. Our charge this afternoon is to explore the ways that several American cities and states have embraced community schools as a strategy for organizing school and community resources around student success. And if somebody tells you there's no standard definition of community schools, please write that one down, because that comes from Patricia Harvey, who was the superintendent in St. Paul for many years, and I stole it from her, so you can steal it from her as well. So a strategy for organizing school and community resources around student success. And of course, a major part of our focus this afternoon will be exploring the role of higher education in contributing to and benefiting from participating in community school initiatives. I have the pleasure of introducing you to this dynamic panel of experts. On my far left, I'm not speaking politically, although I might, but on my far left is Mayor Baraka from Newark, New Jersey. To his, yes, absolutely. Next to Mayor Baraka is Otis Hackney, who is the Chief Education Officer in the Office of the Philadelphia Mayor. Please give him a warm welcome. And right next to me is Pedro Rivera, the Commissioner of Education for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. You saw a name in the program, and I want to offer an explanation. We are really sorry that the mayor of Albuquerque, Richard Berry, had to quite unexpectedly cancel his appearance with us today, but he sends his deep regrets. I must tell you that I took the GRE on Tuesday. And yes, I'm still standing. It was a humbling experience, but I am still in the mode of test taker. So here is a question for the audience. What do these 3 people have in common? Think about that for a moment. Yes, they are all men. You get no points for that. That is too obvious. I learned just 3 minutes ago that they were all principals. So if their mics fail, they're going to use their gymnasium voices, but we have people who have done the work on the ground and who know whereof they speak. But what I really wanted to call to your attention is that they all play leadership roles in the public sector. And these are two of the themes we're going to be exploring on this panel. The whole idea of leadership and the role of leadership, different kinds of leadership, leadership from different places, but the role of leadership in community schools. And the second thing we're going to be exploring is the role of the public sector. You know, our colleague Curtis Siricki from the Oakland Public Schools, I heard him speak one time and he said, you know, the state of public education in the United States is such that we're not going to 501c3 our way out of it. And that really resonated for me as someone who works for a 501c3 and who knows a lot about both the strengths and the limitations of the nonprofit sector. We have to work together. That's what this is about, public and private partnerships. So I'm really excited to have three really terrific leaders from the public sector here to talk with us today. So let's get to work. I am happy to tell you, I know when I'm in the audience, I always wonder, have these people talked to each other? Yes, we have. We had a planning call last week, and so I am not going to be springing any surprise questions on my colleagues. But we agreed that each person would take a couple of minutes to describe, to give kind of an overview of the community schools work that's going on in their cities or state. And in the interest of democracy, which is another theme of this conference, we're going to start in alphabetical order with Mayor Ross Baraka from Newark.
Thank you. So I just want to thank Jane and all of the folks for inviting me here. And, you know, I see Rutgers in the audience. Thank you for being a part and coming down and supporting. This is incredibly important for us in the city of Newark. Community schools is you know, something that we're undergoing and undertaking in the city of Newark, and I like the idea that it's not a model. As a principal, a teacher, you know, for 23 years, we were given a lot of models, and you know, they came for a couple of years and they went as fast as they came, and we're not using this as a model. It is actually a way that we're organizing our school system. We are designing our school system centered around community, centered around all of the institutions in our city, both public and private, trying to get them to make children the major organizing principle of the city, right? To get every institution to focus on the development of young people, pipelines for young people, opportunities for young people, and hopefully the city is the better for it. Obviously, we came to this conclusion through various means. One, because you know, this whole reform kind of movement that's been going on, it's almost a kind of response in some instances to that. But it's also an opportunity for us to look at the real problems that exist in the city of Newark and begin to organize our city around that. We do not believe that there is a serious crisis in public education. We think there's a crisis in urban education. We believe there's a crisis in our community, particularly black and brown communities, because of serious levels of inequality. And for us to kind of address this inequality, we have to get every institution in our city, like most cities are organized, by the way. So what we're saying is, and I'm gonna shut up in a minute, but what we're saying is nothing new based on what's happening anywhere else. Other cities, other communities organize their schools or organize their community around their schools. The institutions are deeply connected to those schools. Unfortunately, the institutions, usually in cities where I'm from, operate in oblivion or operate away from or detached from the schools and from the communities that they're in. So they grow, and the schools basically remain the same, or in some instances go backward. That they have been severed, and I think they've been severed systematically, on purpose, deliberately. And so what we're trying to really do is, like surgeons, we're trying to connect again those institutions back to the school system so the kids can finally grow as the community grows. So when the city grows, the schools and the children should grow with it. And that seems obvious, but it's not the facts. And so we're trying to make that kind of real. So if Rutgers expands, Newark benefits. If the economic system grows, Newark students benefits. If jobs come to the city, the schools benefit, right? So if industry changes, it affects the schools. All of those things, and that's basically what we're trying to do in Newark, and I think we're doing it in a very, very, very thoughtful and careful way by involving as many people as we possibly can, but we're definitely trying to expedite it. We're doing it in about 5 schools now. By the grace of God, we'll get it done in every school in the entire city. So I have more.
That's great. Thanks. Thank you so much. Otis, why don't you tell us a little bit about what's going on in this city, Philadelphia?
Thank you, and good evening or good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here to share with you what the city of Philadelphia is doing around community schools. So working for our mayor, Jim Kenney, those of you that are from Philadelphia, you know him well in his personality, so I'm going to evoke a little bit of my inner Jim Kenney right now around how he cares about young people for the city and what are some of the issues that are challenging our children. So when he talks about community schools, he always leads off with Philadelphia as being the largest poorest city in the country. We have a 26% poverty rate. So of all the large cities and major cities in the country, Philadelphia is at the highest, and which is a number that has existed for many years, and the city is having a hard time trying to move that needle. And so as Mayor-elect Jim Kenney, when he campaigned, he talked about community schools because he was learning about the opportunities that community schools were having, not just locally, because there were some unofficial community schools, and you also had the Netter Center, which is a community school. So learning about some of the opportunities that could be created if you align resources around children and families to improve the climate in schools, academic outcomes for children in schools. So how do you best do that? So once he became mayor, and it was a very bold move to put that on the table to say that the city was going to do community schools in partnership with the School District of Philadelphia, but also an important piece when you talk about using nonprofits to help get it done. The city also and its citizens put some skin in the game by having a beverage tax. And so part of our beverage tax that was passed last year is going to the initiatives around the expansion of quality pre-K, and also a project that we call Rebuild, which is dealing with parks, recs, and libraries. And then the last one would be community schools. So as of today, we have 12 community schools. 11 are funded through the beverage tax. 1 is in partnership with Drexel University as a Promised Neighborhood. But we have 12 community schools, and we have different grade ranges. We have some that are just elementary. We have a couple middle schools and a few high schools. And so we are currently in year 2. We just added 3 this year, which brought us to 12. We would have liked to do more, but we are also under litigation with the beverage tax, so it's holding us up. Thankfully for us right now, it's at the state Supreme Court level, and we have won in the 2 lower courts, so we're hoping that we will be successful and be able to move our expansion up. Each community school has a community school coordinator. We also have obviously office that supports all of our coordinators in those schools. And where we are right now in this process is how do we build out the systems to support schools, especially as we bring them in. Just to echo some of the points that were just made, is we're really trying to do the same work. It's very similar. So whatever Newark is doing, other cities near us like Trenton, or also in the Lehigh Valley or Baltimore or New York, is really how do we align services to deal with the obstacles and barriers that negatively impact the child's learning. That's our approach. What I preach to my folks in my office is, and this one from when I was a teacher to a principal to whatever, is high expectations with high support. How do we build in those resources? We set high expectations for our children and families, but how do we make sure that they have the resources and support? What I saw when I was a suburban principal right outside Philadelphia, I was at Springfield Township, one of the many Springfields in the country, Springfield Township High School, and one high school in town, and I can tell you that was a hub of the community. So many programs and services went there. Students, I had social workers at a suburban school that had water polo teams, but then I come to South Philadelphia High School in Philadelphia, and I can't find a social worker or find someone on that's regularly staffed to support my children with some of the highest needs in the city. So adopting that approach, because we don't call it a model either, is really a philosophical approach to how do we service children and families in the city. So that's where we are today, and look forward to some more questions that you have around that. Yes.
Great.
Good afternoon, everyone. I know it's been a long day. We gotta keep you engaged. I'll try that again. What do you think? Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
All right, good afternoon, good afternoon. Thank you, because it's been a long day for me as well, so you've waken me up. I'm going to try to take a few minutes and set some context around community schools and community schools throughout the Commonwealth. And probably, it may be helpful because I know you've really engaged in a day of learning and really just hearing a lot of information. And if you're anything like me, you attended your first session and you said, you know what, I'm going to go back and I'm going to do that. And then you went to your second session and said, no, I'm going to go back and I'm going to do that. And then 3, 4, now your head's spinning saying, all right, what can we do? Can I get it all done? How much time do I have? How much money do I have? How much capacity do I have? And I think the beauty of community schools is that it's a very organic and evolving process. I mean, at the end of the day, community schools and this process of community schools are really focused to do one thing, and that's to best serve your students in your community. And I think it's extremely important as I kind of establish this context and share with you some background, just to kind of hear where Philadelphia is and where we are as a Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is in terms of community schools. This is not, the first time we've really taken a shot at this. We've actually been engaging and participating and investing in community schools for over 20 years. At that time, it's when Ira and Newark really started to involve themselves in this movement. And, if anything like me, I remember when I was a principal here in Philadelphia, we did this work and didn't know that it was called community schools. And we just we said, whatever you need, and we're going to step up and do it. And leaders came together and started to establish organic movements. So as we look at 20 years later, we're extremely proud of the fact, humbled, but we also understand there's much work to be done to identify. We now have around 51 school buildings, house around 5 school districts across the Commonwealth that have identified and fully functional community schools that really embrace the strategies with absolute fidelity. We're in the process of having 2 more that are emerging that should be coming online very, very soon. But we know that each and every community across the Commonwealth has its own way of organizing and developing those strategies, which is, if nothing else, I think it's probably most important to share with you all. First, we know here in Philadelphia we have the University-Assisted Partnership Model, which is some of what you heard around the Netter Center, as well as a local government engaged through the work supported by the Mayor's Office and by Otis. And really, we understand that in addition to those partnerships, we have universities that are stepping up in meaningful ways. I also have to really take a moment and share, kudos with Otis. He and I have known each other for a number of years, and even before being the city chief and really pushing this model, when he was serving as an assistant principal and a principal, bringing those resources together were really the organic seeds, to invest in programs like this. But not only here in Philadelphia do we see this model really continuing to take shape. In the Lehigh Valley and Erie communities, they rely heavily on coordinated funding from their local United Way to create and engage in a collective impact around community schools. In Lancaster and Pittsburgh, their school districts take a more active approach to supporting and really driving the community school model, so they have more of a district-aligned approach. But I think at the end of the day, it's important to answer the question, why? Because you're going to have to go back and you're going to tell this story, you're going to sell this story, you're going to start to bring stakeholders together. And, as Otis shared with you, with a 26% poverty rate, and as the mayor shared with you, the need to engage communities, we have to bring the message home that community schools allow us and ensure a focus on equity. It's a focus on removing barriers to accessing resources, to creating opportunities, and providing services that traditionally may be difficult for our neediest students and families. So when you say quality educational resources, regardless of zip code, it's absolutely the opportunity to bring the resources to a population of students that are just readily available to students in other communities. It's also providing an opportunity to focus on the whole child, to focus holistically. It allows teachers to focus on the work of teaching and learning. It allows principals to focus on the work of leading their schools, and superintendents to focus on the work of leading their school districts. It allows other partners to focus their skill sets and fulfill their core values, while at the same time serving their communities. When I was a superintendent, it was interesting when we started to engage in this community school work, the question was, so what do you need us to do? And I'd answer, I need you to do what you do well in service of our kids, so that I can do what I do well. If I can count on you to be the social worker, if I can count on you to provide mental health services, physical health services, if I can count on you to help feed my kids, I can allow my teachers to focus on teaching those kids and spending every minute they have with them on teaching and learning and instruction. And probably as importantly, if not most importantly, it promotes shared engagement and ownership. When you engage in this community school model, everyone has skin in the game. Everyone has skin in the game. And it's kind of like establishing a potluck in your educational system, right? If you invite someone to come over and eat and you have all the food ready, they're probably going to cancel at the last minute on you. But if you say, you know what, I need you to bring the potato salad, there's a greater likelihood that they're going to show up. And they're going to be on time because they don't want to be the one that no one had potato salad on their plate because they came late. Which is why, consequently, I sign up for the silverware. Because I never know when I'm going to show up. So when I show up to my family events and I see that they've been eating with their hands, and give me that dirty look because I didn't bring the forks and knives early enough. But when you think about just this concept of shared ownership, it really engages and starts a different conversation. Because you're not saying those kids, you're not saying your kids, you're saying our kids. And when you're going to invest in any resource in which you're saying our, there's a greater likelihood that you're going to come to the table, stay at the table, but more importantly, look to invest to bring more resources to the table. So I look forward to engaging in more conversation, but at the end of the day, when you go home and you're going to have to, sell this, sustain this, and make a connection. It's yours. You make it work for you. It's really dependent on and relies on what the needs of your community are, but it's an opportunity to bring more folks to the table to best serve our kids. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, let's give them a round of applause for their really great opening statements. You gave us a lot to think about, and there are a lot of analogies in the community schools work, but potluck is a new one to me, so I thank you for that. And I appreciated the idea that it's potluck with a menu, because what a community school is all kinds of partners with no plan and no intentionality. So we definitely want to be thinking about this as a curated dinner party, but I love the analogy, so thanks for sharing that. I was going to ask you, what is something unique or special about what's going on in your cities or states? But I honestly think you have all answered that. So I want to take us in a different direction, which is, as promised, what is the role of the public sector in supporting community schools? So we've talked about public-private partnerships. We've talked about we can't 501c3 our way into or out of this work. So we know there's a role for both sectors, and I'd love to hear from all three of you about what you see as the role of the public sector and how you think about the multifaceted nature of the public sectors in your cities or in your state, and how you're organizing those resources.
Well, so there's a couple of things I wanted to add to that, but I want to say too is the community schools is just not about us coming together like in a kumbaya moment to do good by kids, right? So that's not what it is. It is really a systemic approach to making sure that our kids are successful, that everybody understands that, and every institution in the city is organized primarily, in some instances, for that outcome. And that's important because what it says and what it gets you to look at is that at the present, that is not taking place. That in other places it may be, but in your community or your city, it is not, right? And so how do you make that happen? And so at the top, the city itself has to take a responsibility for it, right? The city, the superintendent have to take a clear and direct responsibility for pushing or all the institutions or organizing them, galvanizing them around the young people in the city. We put together a national advisory kind of board, which pulls people in from around the country to kind of inform the work that we do based on practices that are taking place elsewhere and giving us an opportunity to direct what we're doing and making sure we're not making the same mistakes that other people made, because you're going to make some mistakes. You just don't want to make the same ones. We have a children's cabinet, which is basically our opportunity to organize all of the folks locally, both public, private, nonprofit, social service sector, together to have conversation around what exactly we need to do for our young people in the city. How do we build the correct pipelines for these kids that have been severed? And that's important for us to understand that they've been cut, because then it kind of puts the context on what we have to do and a sense of urgency around it, because these things didn't happen by happenstance, right? This didn't happen by accident. Like, these kids are not severed from the rest of society simply because they're black and brown and were born in Newark. This happened deliberately. And so we have to deliberately fix it, right? And that's important. We have a youth policy board. Why? Because there are policies and laws and practices that are taking place in the state and in the city that encumber us, that create roadblocks for us. So, or there's no bridges there at all. So we have to create policy that create bridges, that take away the roadblocks, that make it easier for people to function in these spaces. And that's important. And so all of those things are very intentional, and it takes all of the public sector to be involved. The entire public sector has to. It just makes no sense that you would even talk about the public sector without talking about people's children, because it just doesn't make sense to talk about family growth without understanding the health of children. There's an African proverb. The greeting, they used to say, "How's the children?" Right, and that determines how the community is. And if, God forbid, somebody asked us, "How's our children?" we would be telling them we're in serious bad shape, right? So we have to fix that, and I think that's what the public sector's responsibility is in this, to be leadership, to be a voice, to be a galvanizer, and to provide the kind of direction that's completely necessary. And the last piece is when we say our kids, well, I mean, what does that mean? Right? I mean, what does that mean? I mean, when people say our kids, I mean, who are you talking about? And that's the important piece, right? So it's like when people say generically the children are the future. Well, whose children? Right? Whose children are you talking about? Because generally, that's some people's children are not looked at as the future. Right? They looked at it as something differently. And so on his face, you have to begin to look at the children that you're seeing as the future. And if that proposition becomes very real to you, then you become very nervous about that idea, because we haven't prepared the children for the future. And so all the institutions have to be organized around that principle. And basically that's what we're trying to do in Newark, starting with our office.
That's great. Yes, sometimes we say we want to collaborate, but what we mean is we want other people to change, right?
Right.
And I think what the mayor is talking about is, changing the behavior of his office and the way he's organized the children's cabinet as a public-private venture and as a group that is looking at data together.
Right.
And making decisions together about what they can do to move the needle on those data. So really great. Otis, I see you.
Yes. So I'll give an example, and I think the nation just witnessed it when we talk about, when the public collectively gets involved around a shared goal. How many folks here, and I'm not going to get myself in trouble with my boss, I hope, put a bid in you're from a city that put in a bid for Amazon? Did you see the collective support, impact, from the local level, the state level, the business, the university. Everybody came together and said, we want Amazon to come to Philly.
Yeah.
Or we want Amazon to come whatever city, because
That's right.
we're all competing, right? And when I watched it, and I even went to the event when they rolled out the film, and I'm like, man, this is so impressive. And I'm standing there as a person who grew up not too far from here. I was just sharing with them. There used to be a lot of really good parties in this room. I grew up in this area, and I didn't go to Penn. So, but as a person who grew up in Philadelphia, who taught in Philadelphia, born and raised and has a child in the school district of Philadelphia, and when I saw the collective interest and effort around, we got to get Amazon to come to the city, I was amazed and angry.
Yeah.
I said, if they did that around schools, our city would be #1 for Amazon.
Yeah. Woo-hoo. That's right.
Because, we look at the poverty rates, we look at the quality or how people perceive Philadelphia schools and all this. I'm just like, if we put that much effort, so if all the university presidents and all the business in the chamber and with the things that, were done in Harrisburg, I'm not picking on Harrisburg, right? And like, all the effort was, how do we make this environment conducive for them? And I'm like, do we ever take time to make the environment conducive for our children and families to thrive? And I said, if we did that, all our cities would be in such a different place. So when you think about what it looks like, we've actually seen an example very recently that speaks to what that collective impact can be. And so thankfully, I work for a boss who is very easy to work for around this issue because, even when he was talking about how do we attract Amazon, the same day or same week, he'll talk about, but if we don't get our schools right, it's not going to work. So that's why I feel confident talking about what I'm saying right now without getting in trouble around saying it, because we know that we have to address schools in Philadelphia. And it doesn't mean just fixing schools and gentrifying neighborhoods. It really means fixing schools in our most challenged neighborhoods, because once again, if we can fix the schools and address the needs of those communities, everything else will all lift up together. And so, but when you asked that question, I was trying to think of an example, and it was just like, Amazon, everybody wanted it, and everybody jumped in, and everyone said, we'll help, and this is what we will give up. This is what we will do in order to make this work. And so if we can rally people around education that way, or imagine a world that existed that way, then schools would look totally different.
I think you got a big amen on that one.
Thank you.
Right? And you're right. You think about when cities want the Olympics to come, look at the kind of collective action and that they can put forward. So what would you say about this? I should call him Commissioner, right? Pedro. We do know each other from his wonderful work in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, on community schools. What would you say you see as the role of the public sector?
Yeah, I think, a number of areas in which they can engage. And first, fully agree with you, Otis. Even being in Harrisburg, sometimes I ask ourselves, what are we doing up here in Harrisburg? But I think most importantly, it's, first, there's opportunities to really engage and bring about innovation in schools. Far too often we see the public sector, we see the social sector, we see the education sector, and, private as silos. And it's like never the two shall meet until there's an issue or a problem. And, I think to myself, and especially as, Otis shared this anecdote that, if we could look to break down those barriers and bring public sector innovation into our schools. Mental health service clinics, for example, in our school buildings, or school health clinics in buildings, or institutions that are dealing with food insecurity in our buildings, and bringing them together to really, not only bring those resources and those services, but the way in which they provide those resources and services. We can learn so much through this collective impact of innovation. The second big area is really education and community schools need champions. It's always an important reminder whenever, I have an opportunity to speak education to a large group, especially those of educators, and then, walking outside into, business industry and service partners. We know that you're 7 times more likely to share a negative experience than you are a positive experience. And when you're a school system in which you're serving thousands to tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands clients each and every day, each and every hour, and you know that that's the fact, we have to be 7 to 10 times more diligent to share the positive stories around how we're changing lives through our systems. So the public sector working with the education system just really being, being champions, being able to share that message as an ambassador to say, hey, here's what's happening, at West Philly High. Here's what's happening at Spring Garden. Here's what's happening, at Kensington High School. Because, the truth of the matter is when those outside of, the school district outside the city pick up the newspaper and read the first 15 pages of the paper, they're never going to hear those stories. But they're much more likely to stand around the water cooler and say, hey, did you see that tweet about, which is why we have to be 10 times more diligent to share those positive stories through our network. I also have to take a moment and just share engagement is especially important. One of the things that we did, and I spent, over 10 years here in the School District of Philadelphia, born and raised in Philly, teacher through administration, and moved out to Lancaster. And I remember having been a principal here and bringing lots of resources to my school district and engaging with my team in Lancaster and saying, I want to do this. I want, LIHEAP here. I want to do taxes in school. I want to bring mental health services and physical health services. Oh, you want community schools? And I was like, no, I want to do services, blah, blah. And then finally they sat me down and schooled me and says, yeah, what you want to do is called community schools. And one of the things we did, we didn't only start to provide services, but we created, this system of support where the service providers were coming into buildings and meeting on a monthly basis. And then quarterly, we had what we called what they called the major stakeholders meeting. I called let's learn how to get out of each other's way meeting, where the superintendent, the mayor, police chief, fire chief, the president of the chamber, we came together and spent a half hour learning about, what was on top of the agenda and walked away. And I wouldn't allow them to walk away without making a commitment to say that I will not be the barrier of X. And I promise to go back and share with this list of individuals you gave me that are doing the work day to day to say, I applaud your work and let me know how I can make this work easier for you. And, we'd meet quarterly, and it was just to make sure we kind of kept everyone abreast of what was happening, but more importantly, to get the commitment to lift the barriers that we sometimes create difficulties in serving kids and serving communities. And as a superintendent, I always had one serious philosophy, which was, it was probably one of the greatest quotes I ever saw. It's amazing what can be accomplished if you don't care who gets the credit. So I walked into that meeting knowing and telling my team, I don't care who gets the credit. I will, champion the mayor and thank him for allowing me to teach math if I make sure that every single one of my kids has access to more resources. And thank the president of the hospital, and thank the police chief, and thank the fire chief, and thank my local university partners for allowing us to do what we do every day if we get the resources and the support needed to do what we do every day. And, it's interesting because as we bought into that philosophy of not caring who got the credit, other folks started to model that behavior. And, when you had the mayor who now, just retired with high, popularity, percentages, start to say, you know what, I don't even care if folks know I accomplished, what we accomplished. And by the way, it's interesting, so you have to think, as we've been engaging and improving the system, the school system in Lancaster, if you visited Lancaster City 10 years ago, and you visit it today, it's an entirely different place. I always joke with my wife, when we moved from Philly there, it was 8 o'clock, and I couldn't find a place to have dinner. As a matter of fact, I pulled into a Carrabba's and asked, so where can we go find a place, to eat? And they sent me to a gas station, Sheetz, which is kind of like our Wawa, pick up a wrap. And, a few weeks ago, we tried to get a reservation to an Italian restaurant that opened up, and they said, oh, you have 3 weeks. So where the heck am I? Is this Lancaster? I went from having to buy a wrap at Sheetz to making a reservation 3 weeks from now. So it's amazing what can happen when you have community partners, when you have civic partners, and you have business partners coming together for the sole purpose of improving the city and improving a community. And what we've seen as a result happen, has really transpired and really transformed the whole community. And so if anything, I hope we can continue to encourage that through this movement.
Have you noticed that a lot of what Pedro is talking about is food?
I am a little
We'll,
hungry.
we'll give him one of those. We'll give him one of those beautiful little cakes that Joanne was handing out. That's great. So you
have
know,
to change it.
sometimes people accuse us in the community schools world about not talking enough about the challenges. I don't think that's true. I think you can tap a challenge vein in any of us, and we'd be happy to talk about them. I do want each of you to have an opportunity to talk about, you know, what has been the biggest challenge in the work that you've been doing in community schools now that you're actually doing a lot of implementation? You don't have to go in the same order, you know.
It works.
Well, I mean, I think there are many challenges, actually. I mean, one of the major challenges is always resources, right? So making sure we have enough resources to put into what we need around community schools. There are very few resources, and getting people to believe that community schools is actually something that is worth investing in. To be able to go to state and local officials and private sector and philanthropic community and say, listen, this is something that is going to work, this is something that actually works. You should invest in this idea. It has been difficult, and because a lot of the money and resources have been used to fund other things, which are usually kind of the antithesis of what community schools are. People believe that community schools is just some idea put together by these liberal-minded individuals who are interested in the affective side of kids. The affect of kids have nothing to do with the kind of academic, growth. And, it's not about whether we can feed kids. We need to have good teachers and great leaders in schools. If you had a great principal, they have this idea of what a principal is. And, if they could, make him in a machine and reproduce them over and over again and put them in all of these places, then the schools would be just fine. And so they're spending a lot of money on trying to find this person, right? And,
Right.
and figuring out how to reproduce them and put them in these schools. Because if this great leader worked in this school, why doesn't great leaders work in all these other schools and great teachers? So they're spending a lot of money on that, on teacher contracts, spending a lot of money on tenure and, pay, merit pay, and all these other ideas that they think are going to improve schools. And so that leaves us with a small amount of money for all of you guys who are yelling and screaming about kids need to eat, kids need to go to the doctor, they need to have glasses, they need to see, you need to make sure that they can actually have a safe passageway to school, that people aren't getting shot as they walk to school, that they have access to the same curriculum and classes, and they're able to focus. And they need an after-school program, by the way. You're worried about an after-school program, and they figure that all of that stuff means nothing. And that's the problem. We are still in the stages of trying to convince the rest of America that this is actually what works. Or more importantly, we just want to do what you guys are doing. Right? So.
Thanks.
So I would say for our challenges, and it's interesting you started off with the definition of community schools. First, it's like defining community schools or explaining what a community school is to people, what it means, what it should look like, what you should expect. And that ties right into, and when I talk about that in terms of the expectations, when schools here in Philadelphia, when, we were going through the process and they were named a community school, the example I use all the time is I think they thought it was like a light switch. Like you just turn it on and all of a sudden all this stuff is just going to start flowing and happening in your school. I said, no, it's more like a dimmer or a dial. You kind of got to turn it up and it takes time. Right. And so in getting people to understand, because really everything that you're trying to do, I'm part of a workforce steering committee for the city, and I was talking to one of the MDO, managing director of the city, and I said, all of this sounds great. I said, but really what we're trying to do is just change people's behavior. I said, I hear we got to get into the nuts and bolts and logistically, but we want people to do things differently. So what's missing in this conversation are people that are experts at changing people's behavior. What are the things that drive people to change their behavior? And when you think about a community school approach, that is a lot of what's happening. And so when you talk about aligning everyone around, I preach all the time, shared vocabulary with shared meaning. If you have a shared vocabulary with shared meaning in a building, just from an instructional piece, right? Just as teachers, this is how we teach, This is what we do. Do we all share that? Yes. Do we share the approach? Yes. All of a sudden, the school just starts moving mountains, and you could be in the roughest zip code in a city or a township or whatever, but all of a sudden, things start working. And so it's how do you get people to get there? So leadership does matter. I know you hinted to that earlier, and throughout all of this, so you need the right leadership at multiple levels in order to do that. But when we talk about just really getting people's expectations wrapped around about the amount of time that it takes to put these systems in place, what it takes to alter and change and modify people's behavior in a caring way, so that way, and sometimes you got to move some people out of the way in order to do it. Like when Pedro said, you don't want anyone walking away being an obstacle, a barrier to success. And that is something we preach in the office all the time. Like I tell my people on my team, you cannot be the reason why this is not getting done. I cannot have a person stopping this from getting this done. So if you're talking in a school, you can't have a teacher or a principal, why are you prohibiting us from getting this done? And so it's how do you get people to understand that, get on the same page, and say, okay, these are our shared values. These are the actions that we're going to take. And get some buy-in from people and listen to the community. Just really quickly, like I give people an example of when you're trying to do like community engagement or parent engagement, and they want to invite them out. I said, and you can say, we're going to hire the best chef in the city, and he's going to come in, he or she is going to come in and cook a meal for this community. Now, they may be a fabulous chef. They could have Michelin stars and all these things and everything, and it's fantastic. But that community walks in, and they're just like, all right, what are you serving me? And you are serving them the finest French cuisine. And they're just like, we just wanted soul food. You should have just made them the best soul food they ever had. Because now they'll come back, because you don't want people walking in saying, I don't eat that. What's a ramp? I don't know what that is. I don't want that. Because that's not what they want. But then slowly, how do you introduce them to other cuisines? Because first, if I just show you I can cook really, really well, when I put something new on the table, you're at least willing to try it now. You say, all right, you know what? Yeah, he can really cook. I'll try it. And that's how we have to engage our communities, is really identify the things that they want, that they care about, hook them in. Once they're hooked, then you say, okay, you know what? Let me educate you to a few other things. But now when I'm educating you, I'm not educating you from a perspective of I look down on you or things that you value, because I first introduced myself to you with the things that you love. So when I tell you that, I appreciate that, but there's some other things. So we talk about parenting and how we help parents move forward. I understand the values that you have in your community, but these are some other things that you should add to your repertoire. So I'm not ever going to talk about community, what's wrong with you. I'm always going to start with what's right with you, and then add to that. But getting people to have that patience to go through that process, whether we're the ones implementing it. So I have to tell my boss sometimes, you got to be a little patient. We're getting there. Give me a moment. And also with the community or people that are watching, and getting them to understand what it's going to take to get things done. Thank you.
So that's a tough balance, isn't it, to maintain the sense of urgency and to manage expectations about the long-range nature of the change.
Well, that's why you have to deliver and get some wins along the way.
Yeah.
You must set some small milestones and some easy victories that you can get.
So Pedro, what would you add to this conversation about?
That's what's nice about going third. So much was shared. I think ultimately, just to bring it together, one of the biggest barriers, obstacles, and challenges is trust. I think especially when we're discussing the work that we're engaging in today, we know that if there's anything that relationships do, it really magnifies vulnerability. And with all other relationships, something that we have to be intentional about. And as I shared with some of our experiences, so first you have to put your intentions right up front. What is it that you want to accomplish? Why is it that you're coming together? We have to have those the conversations around equality versus equal. Especially when you're bringing partners to the table, and that's one of the harder conversations to have. When you're talking about equity and you're discussing, what it is that you hope to accomplish, it doesn't mean that you're going to be cutting everything equally by the number of parts. You're going to be focusing on moving in one direction, and you're going to, and invest and engage, accordingly. Really, one of the quick thoughts that I wrote down is, you have to establish right up front how the organizations see each other, whether they really see each other as a valued partner, whether you see yourself, you see each other as a vendor or a vendor or a resource, or you see each other as someone from the outside coming in. One of the first definitions we had to come up with as a organization when we started to really engage heavily in community schools was identifying, so are they a partner or are they a vendor? And we have two different, set of expectations from those two, stakeholder groups. Partners, we come to the table and we evolve together. If you're 100% a vendor, I'm going to tell you what I want, what I need, and what I'm going to pay, how I'm going to pay for services. And we're not going to commingle the two. And as I shared, when we have those get out of the way quarterly meetings, it's probably the only meeting in the city that every CEO or boss came to. And it became, a pretty hot commodity. I mean, when you have, the mayor, non-negotiable showing up, police chief, fire chief, CEO of the hospital, CEO presidents of the universities, president of the chamber, and philanthropic organizations sitting in one room and having a conversation around the future of a city. It's amazing how many folks wanted an invitation to the dance. And so you have to really be upfront to express and make clear your intentions, what your non-negotiables are, and how you've established a North Star to meet those non-negotiables. So I think at the end of the day, trust is probably the most important factor, the most important trait we had to engage in, we had to invest in.
So I promised that I would bring this plane in on time. I know that some people have engagements right now, and so we are going to, although there's much more to talk about, and honestly, I could listen to these three guys forever, but we're not going to do that right now. I want to say I feel a whole lot better knowing that we have leaders like this in the public sector, and I think you may feel the same way, so please join me in thanking our distinguished panel.
I want to thank the panel also. That was an incredibly rich discussion, and with Jane, it does make you hopeful about the potentiality. I want to just mention one thing that Otis talked about when he spoke about Amazon. You said getting every university in the city committed to doing that work, stepping out front. Think what would happen in this city and every other city in the United States if every university became dedicated to the children in its locality. What would happen? We could change things dramatically. And calling the question on the public sector, but also on the nonprofit, but particularly the university and medical sectors, asking them, not even asking them, indicating they need to come up to the plate. If you take children seriously, families seriously, communities seriously, then it is in fact our core responsibility to be engaged with our neighbors for our own learning and transformation, but certainly to produce what we're supposed to produce. That is communities that have a decent quality of life for everyone. If we're going to contribute to the public good and knowledge, I want to take Otis's call as a call that we move forward. So thank you all very, very much. I want to thank Jane. I want to thank the panelists. This was a terrific conversation. Now, just to note that we are next convening at 6 p.m. for a reception in the Hall of Flags with excellent food, excellent entertainment, and excellent conversation. I do want to indicate in the meantime, you could, in fact, have some of the Rebel Crumbles, which is the great cakes that were discussed. Rebel Crumbles are made by the school children in Philadelphia, by community children in Philadelphia. They are made as part of a Netter Center's project. And every school now, in public school and archdiocesan school, has Rebel Crumbles as part of their breakfast food. So as an example of also the creativity of young people and what they can be doing. So have some Rebel Crumbles, and the students keep changing the recipe. So if you have ideas of how to improve it, just hand us cards, and we'll pass them on to the school children in West Philadelphia. Thank you very much, and see you at 6 o'clock. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.